the father of semiconductors, and also one of the forefathers of computer technology, although you'd never guess because he looks amazingly young, Mr. Salvador Dado Banatao. Thank you, sir.
Should I start my talk right away? Thank you. Hi, good morning. I've been on my way down here. I've been talking to the organizers, and I understand there's quite a few of you here who are entrepreneurs. Is that right? Okay. So I'm with you. I was an entrepreneur too before I became a venture capitalist. This is in Silicon Valley. So what I would like to talk about this afternoon or this morning is a little bit of my background and experience after I left the Philippines to go to the United States. And then after school, graduate school at Stanford, I stayed in Silicon Valley. So I would like to give you a little bit of detail there, simply because after school I joined the ranks in terms of being a design engineer. And then from there I became, as they say, I became suicidal and became an entrepreneur, knowing that the chances of failure are fairly high. The urge is still there to prove your capabilities as an entrepreneur. But back a little bit. When I graduated from college here in the Philippines at Mapua Institute of Technology, after taking the board exams, I looked for a design job. And it took me months to realize that there were very few, if any, design jobs. You know, as an engineer, you are trained to create things or products. But at that time, there was none that I could find. There were some programming jobs, but I was more focused on how I can use my engineering background to create things. So I pretty much gave up. And the only thing that made me stay longer here was that one Sunday afternoon, I was reading the classified ads, and there was this advertising by Philippine Airlines looking for pilot trainees. So having no option, simply because there was none of the kind of work that I was looking for, soon enough, I started my pilot training with Philippine Airlines that led to flying a few of the Hawker Siddeley's, turboprops, and so on. But it was fateful because one day after I finished my flight, I stopped by the faculty room at Mapua, and there was my electronics professor. And immediately, as soon as I entered the room, he gave me this application for Boeing Aircraft Corporation. And I told him that, look, I enjoy flying now. No, you should go back to engineering. That's what you are good for. And so I just took that application form, although it sat on top of the cabinet for about a month. Again, one idle Sunday, I took it, filled it out. But the short of it is that after about roughly 2 months, I got my visa to go to the United States to join Boeing Aircraft Corporation to be part of the design team for the 747, the Boeing 747. And I felt like I was in heaven because finally I'm an engineer. I started to design things systems for the 747. But then I thought that that was not sufficient, simply because if you look at the number of aircraft that is being designed every year, there's not a lot. And so I decided to go back to school, basically graduate school, and I entered Stanford University. I was really intrigued by, there were two disciplines that was very interesting. One of them was computing architecture, and then the other was solid-state device physics. And I didn't know what that meant initially. I think I know a little bit about computing, but then solid-state device physics, I thought it was all physics. What it turned out to be is it's the foundation of math and physics for semiconductors. Okay, let me try this. Is that okay? All right, so as I was saying, those two disciplines merged enabled me to stay in Silicon Valley and begin to do the work in design. At that time, Silicon Valley was still a really, I would say, almost like a farming town. There were a lot of orchards, fruit orchards, and at that time, maybe there were about 5 semiconductor companies. So I joined one of them, and that was National Semiconductors, where we immediately designed some of the first microprocessors in the industry and designing them into very, very small chips. And I thought, again, like the first time I joined Boeing, again, I felt like I was in heaven, in a totally different field. And that was endless fun, of course, because you go to work every day, and it seems like, because this was the beginning of the birth of semiconductors in the whole world, every day you go to work and it seems like you are inventing something new. So finally, I thought, okay, this will be my career. And I stayed in the Valley. I still live there, actually, but I became design engineer and so on. And then after about 7 or 8 years of practice in design, working for other companies, I decided to start my own company. The first company failed. Yeah. Does this work? Can I just take this out then now, or here? Sorry. Sure. And so I gambled in terms of the desire to be an entrepreneur. It's very risky, of course, but I didn't really know that much at that time. As I said, that first company failed simply because we ran out of money and we couldn't raise more money. But then I persevered, and I was able to raise money for the second startup, which is really a continuation of the same idea that I did for the first company. This time, we succeeded. And to this day, that company went public in 22 months after starting it. We broke all the records, and today, in fact, it is still the fastest to IPO company in Silicon Valley. Growth was there simply because we timed the product for the emergence of PC, the personal computer. And in working with Microsoft and Intel and so on, that cooperation built up the foundations of personal computing. And that's, of course, a huge industry at this time. And so, having had some returns in terms of, you take it to IPO, you own some ownership in the company, and you get confident. I started a third company. I'm sorry, the second company actually was the very first PC chipset in the industry. And the foundations of the PC is all about those designs. And those chips are still in the PC computer today. But then I was not happy with the graphics peripherals because they were fairly slow. And at that time, I was observing that there was going to be this games market. And so I looked at the subsystem and again re-architectured the PC one more time to change the architecture on the buses and the control signals. And we created a standard called peripheral chip interconnect, which is a standard today. And if you're a systems designer, that's a standard bus, and it's not only is it used for PCs, but all kinds of telecommunication systems and other things. But that enabled me to design a graphics chip that is easily 10 times faster than the fastest graphics chips at that time. It still retains the same architecture that you will see in your PC today. Then I became a venture capitalist, meaning I invest in startups. And one company to the other, you get a little bit lucky. Sometimes you fold the company or it doesn't work. But the valley is so rich in these kinds of thinking. In other words, you may fail, but we consider that success simply because you learned something about how to fail, and that hopefully in your next company, you don't repeat that.
Okay.
So, why do I continue to stay in Silicon Valley? Simply because about technology. So I'm back to my roots as an engineer. Every business plan that I look at, the first thing I look at is how good the technology is used in that product. And so for those of you who are engineers, entrepreneurs, you may be downplaying that background you have in engineering now, but wait until you get engaged in the industry and begin the practice of design and other things. You will fall in love with it. That's what you studied, and you will do great things. But if I can advise you on that one, I never gave up looking for that job in engineering design. Keep that in mind. Understanding that the Philippines is still developing its science and technology capabilities. Hello? Okay. Capabilities, you may still have a tough time, but keep at it. One way or the other, you will succeed. And that's really what I did. And for those of you guys who have the opportunity to go to Silicon Valley, I would say, throw everything away you have here, go there. And to this day, it still is the gold standard for product innovation, for entrepreneurship, and building large companies. So that's a little bit of my background after I left the Philippines. Now, this conference is about small and medium enterprises, or SMEs. And that there has been I would say, an emphasis lately, especially at APEC. They really, really believe in inclusive innovation that may lead to economic development. So it could be inclusive economic development. To me, what that all means is the fact that as many segments of the economy, of the population, must contribute to economic development. Large enterprises, small enterprises, medium, and maybe even micro. I have to admit, though, that I still don't understand what micro enterprises means, but maybe somewhere there's just smaller than small. But however, that has been even in near developed countries, that has been the mantra for, in the short term, maybe 2 or 3 years. But it may have been discussed longer than that. So the participation of small and medium enterprises can be enhanced by the need to base it on innovation. So what is innovation? It is doing something that has never been done before. So in some cases, you may disrupt existing practices. You may disrupt large companies if you have an innovation that is valuable enough embedded in a product to where you can obsolete all the other products in that space. However, that is easier said than done. So what I would like to talk about now are what I call success factors for startups. Now, I want to close the loop with you that a lot of startups actually start as small enterprises or medium enterprises. Typically, they are one of two employees with a great idea. And that's really tiny. Maybe that's what micro is all about. But the infusion of innovation in that equation gives you the opportunity to build a medium enterprise and eventually, potentially, a very large enterprise. A lot of the successful Silicon Valley companies, like an Intel, which is about 150 billion, Hewlett-Packard, which is about 86 billion, and so on. A lot of successful companies in the Valley started that way, really, really very small. But what enabled them to become big is all about technology. They applied the right technology to solve a product need. In other words, there is a latent need in the market such that if you can design a product, you can sell the product to that latent need or meet that need in the market. Now, it's really hard actually to define these needs. So what I would like to do now is describe a little bit about what I consider, as I said, 5 success factors for startups. And again, I would repeat that you can use this for even small or medium enterprises, which is the theme of today's conference. But the only thing I would add is that as you do that, think about innovation, think about technology, and potentially you can build a large company. All right, where's the control here? All right, let's see the first slide. Okay, so these are the 5 factors, and I derived this from my practice in Silicon Valley, having been involved in many startups, and now as a VC, as I said, funding a lot of technology-based startups. And the quick summary is that the first thing, as I said, is you need to really understand the market requirements or market need. Many companies, even in Silicon Valley, fail simply because they were not able to dissect the market's needs. So even in successful areas where there are a lot of successful companies, this is still a big problem. And so when I invest, I always look for this as number 1. And usually if I don't see the need instantiated properly, what I tell the entrepreneur is that, okay, you go back and clean up your presentation until you show me what problem you are solving. So this is very important. The second one is that assuming that you have that need properly defined, you have to come up with a unique solution. Understanding that a market is the greatest equalizer. What that means is that there are also a lot of engineers or managers who are looking at that market for opportunities to create a product. And so what you do must be unique. Now, I claim that your technology is what makes your product unique. Because marketing is marketing, sales is sales, production is production. You are left with that one thing that you can rely on, your knowledge on technology, and add that to the product definition. The third thing is that you have to come up with a plan for execution based on understanding the market need and that you could potentially have a product defined, a unique product that is competitive. Again, because the market, everyone looks at that, you have to compete. And so it boils down to, again, the technology need there. No, could you go back? Okay. Now then you build your team, a strong technical team, and initially you don't hire all the management right away. You kind of pace yourself as the company needs that kind of member of management. And then finally, you have to have a solid financial plan and be able to raise the money. Now, as a venture capitalist, when we look at a plan given to us by an entrepreneur, what is important to us are the first three. And it's 1, 2, and number 4. The execution plan and the financial plan, we can help the entrepreneurs. So all we look at initially are those 3 items. And then assuming that we like the plan and that we like the team, then typically what we do is end the presentation and tell the entrepreneur or entrepreneurs that, okay, we like your plan, we like your product idea, we will help you on the third one, an execution plan, and we will invest in you. And so that's the point in time when a venture capitalist becomes part of the company, and especially when they finally invest. Next slide. Okay, some important details here, and if you don't mind, let me just read this a little bit because I prepared this a long time ago. Now I forgot some of it, but if you bear with me here, there are a few fundamentals that we watch out for. First thing is that never make a mistake that you can create a market. That is so hard to do. You will absolutely run out of money before anything happens in that market. And as I said, it may never happen, and usually happens for new business models. So that's the distinction as to an existing market. But if you can come up with a new business model, you might be okay. For example, Uber is that kind of an example where there is an existing taxi cab service already, but what they did is they infused technology, GPS mapping, cellular communications, and so on. And you can see how successful they are now. They're all in many countries, many cities. But all they did is they infused that technology. It's the same service as a taxi cab, except it is far better, and in many cases, cheaper. So that's a case where you change the business model to what you think would work and improve on the current solutions. Also, startups, in trying to attempt to create a new market, you will absolutely run out of money. And from there, most likely, the company will fail. It is easier to develop a product vision based on existing markets with identifiable needs. Now, the issue there, however, is that usually you have competition already, or there are newer competitors coming up with their own technologies. Next slide. So, major market needs in large markets, it's a good thing. Now, what are those attributes? On the positive side, market well understood is always good, because then there are a lot of data that has been researched by investment banking firms, research firms, and so on. And from that data, you can glean on the gaps and the needs and so on. There are business models that are already established. And from there, as I said earlier, you can change that a little bit to your advantage, so you have a unique, new and unique product. And large and slow execution companies are vulnerable. They had established a foothold there. And if you look at, in many cases, in an established market, where there are players, usually they rely on the fact that they have revenues. And if you are innovative enough as an engineer, you could come up with much better solution. And then, of course, there's already a large pool of experts, management and engineers. On the negative side, existing products for most market requirements. In other words, there are products existing already. So you will have to compete that, and if you are behind them, because they already have customers with good relationships, you will struggle unless you have a really, really solid, unique technology in there that creates your product very competitive. But that's hard to do, because they are ahead of you. They understand the fact that they're in the market already. They understand more about the market than they do, and they could possibly be already working on a product similar to what you're thinking of. Mature products and product roadmaps. Well, again, it is a target for easy picking by existing incumbents in the market. Well-developed intellectual property. What that means is that those existing companies have property rights on their invention, and if you somehow violate that, they could sue you, and you pay for damages. And then, of course, in any existing market, they are usually served by large companies. Now, this sounds scary, but understand that if you can really define a unique need and come up with a solution, you can muscle your way in. And that is classic Silicon Valley style. It's all about innovation. Next. Now, it is important to understand that it's not just identifying market needs. The key word here is it has to be compelling enough, such that when your product comes out, the buyer looking at it would say, naturally, this is what I have been looking for. And that's usually a sign that you understood those things as you reviewed the market. And when I was still running my companies, I usually tell the marketing organization in my company that I don't want them to begin to even start working with engineering to define a product if they have not heard that from a customer, a potential customer in the future, saying things like that, where that is what I've been looking for, or if you can build that, we will buy it. So this is a fairly rigorous process. In general, new product idea starts with disruptive technology, meaning you're innovating, or a design technique. It doesn't have to be all intellectual property or patent and so on right away. In many cases, assuming that the design is complex enough, there are many approaches to designing the product, and if you just have that one unique approach to design, your product may be cheaper, higher performance, and all kinds of features that makes it better than the other product. So the design technique, meaning the capability of the engineering department not only to innovate in new functionality, but also how good they are in out-designing competition. Now, most startups don't have strong product marketing expertise at the very beginning. So what I do, or what I did in the past when I start my company is I do not start it until I get that first marketing executive in the company because of this issue of understanding market needs. They are, in some cases, harder to find than engineers. Really good marketing guys are rare. A typical problem in product definition. Solution is proposed before understanding the market need. In other words, I've seen that in many engineers where because of their way of thinking, they can design a product anytime. But in many cases, that is a fault in the process where you're still trying to understand the uniqueness of your product. And so I rely on marketing guys' words rather than the engineers when we are at this phase. And engineers have, and I'm an engineer too, are really strong, have strong will. And so sometimes in a meeting, I kick out the engineers and just deal with marketing when we are at this level of discussion. Avoid the classic solution looking for a problem. I have seen that so many times. It's similar to the previous statement that I made in terms of an engineer saying, I know I can solve that problem, when the problem is not yet understood. So besides design execution, quality of product planning determines product success. And when I say planning, it starts from the features, it starts from infusing competitiveness, uniqueness, the kinds of technology that you put in there. Because you don't want to be obsoleted by some other company that has a better technology. Therefore, apply thorough product planning process. And so this process itself is fairly complex, but this is something that has to be done, especially when you're dealing with innovation and technologies. Next slide. Okay, compelling needs. This, you can read this, but let me just point out some of the very, very important parts here. Number one is technologies, designs, and products become relevant only when applied to the right problem. There are just so many technologies floating around, but they also need an application base. In other words, you have to know how to apply those solutions to the right product. There is usually a one-to-one correspondence between product functions and features that define the market needs. For horizontal technologies, look for applications in other markets. In fact, when I say horizontal technology, I mean that unique technology can apply to many other markets also, instantiated in a product. But, however, at the end of the day, you always have to define what we call a go-to-market strategy. In a case where there are many markets that your product or your technology can address, you still have to define that entry into the market because you only have a limited amount of money to spend. What you want to do is attack that market right away, generate revenues and profits, and then from there, as you become stable financially, then you can create more products horizontally for other applications. And then, of course, determine if design technology is big enough to create a product roadmap to to build a substantial company. Now, in your research on the market needs, this does not come out right away. Only when you engage yourself in that market, you begin to learn more about it and even think of, on the last point here, you could potentially build a substantial company. And that has been proven so many times in Silicon Valley, where it starts with a small company like an SME. But with that infusion of technology or innovation, you can actually grow a very, very big company. So I claim, simply because I'm emphasizing this because of the topic of SME, and every time in the recent, I would say 2 years, every time I come here to the Philippines, there is this discussion on inclusion, including SME into economic growth. And I claim that the one big enabler for that inclusion is technology applied into innovation. Otherwise, it will not happen in a big way. So you will still be small or medium, and so on. Now, there are many examples out there from Japan, the US. I mentioned a few in Silicon Valley. In Japan, I don't know how many of you guys know, but Toyota, the person who started Toyota, as we know it now, was just making bicycles in the beginning. And now if you look at that company, it's substantial. Yamaha was just designing motorcycle engines, a huge car manufacturer also. And there are a lot of other examples like that. But what they did was they used technology advantage. Determine if design or technology is big enough to create a product roadmap. Okay, so this is crucial. As you enter a market, it is essential that you look into how your first product would evolve into many other products. And at every stage, what we do is we make sure, once you're in the market, let's digress a little bit, once you're in the market, you begin to understand more about the market and the kind of products that they need from the evolution of your first product. And that will also indicate what kind of technology you may use for that next generation product. And the end result is that you have a product roadmap and very quickly a technology roadmap. Understanding that you cannot predict accurately how long it will take to create a specific technology. So what we do is we kind of imagine the next set of technologies that we need for our future products and make sure that those are ready for when marketing defines the product roadmap, you can easily incorporate that new technology in a newer product. So there are two roadmaps there. We always worry about, we review that every year, and the forecast of the evolution of product or technology is about 3 to 5 years out. So it's a little bit hard, but at some point, you get to know the practice, but you still have to do a lot of work. Next slide. So the process of identifying market requirements, technologies, and design techniques to provide a unique and differentiable solution to a market need. That is simply how you define a product. These are the basics, and if you do this, you'll be okay. Assuming you have the engineers, of course, who know how to design the product. Product definition is an interactive and iterative process of objective discussions between engineers and technologists, product marketing, and in many cases, with customers. It is always important that you keep talking to your existing customers, because if they like your first product, they would, and they buy it, they would most likely volunteer their ideas on the evolution of their product. And that's a rich source of information in defining market needs. listening to customers, sometimes reading between the lines. The thing that you need to worry about here is that they are not always right. And that in many cases, their needs are short-term. In other words, they want to just make sure that they can deliver a new product. So that's fairly short-term. But you, as the provider of these products, you have to look further out. So after you gather all the data, you have to kind of parse it as to what it all means. Next slide. Okay, a little bit of digression here. This is where we inject things like visionary, and in a startup, there are those, especially the founders, there are good people in terms of how they vision out the future. As you can see, the traits there, but all of those things on the people side can be translated to being innovative or part of innovation. There's the technology part of innovation, and there's the people part. They have to match. Next slide. So some things about business models. There are many, many ways to, I would say, deliver a product. And let me just give you an example here. If you look at these lights, maybe lights up there by the ceiling, that is part of the infrastructure where the owner of the building or the home makes sure that it is part of the functionality of the building, and they spend the money as the building is constructed. I'll just give you one example that a company in Silicon Valley did in an industrial building like this. They talked to the typically facilities person, the person that is in charge of maintaining the building. And usually over time, new technologies come up like lights. There are LED lights now, for example. And give them a proposal for enhancing or updating that building. And they took away the friction of the operations VP to go to management and ask for a whole bunch of money to spend in replacing all of those things. What this company did was, look, we will change your bulbs and other things for free. However, whatever savings you made in consumption of electricity with these new technology bulbs, we just need to share from that savings on a monthly basis, because as they are used, of course, they're consuming energy at a certain cost. And so right away, the facilities guy does not have to talk to the management to get more money to spend in changing them. It is the new company's cost. But they figured out that the cost of a lot of these things is tremendous enough that when substituted, that cost goes away, significant savings, and that's part of the revenue of the new company that changed the business model. He took away the friction. The facilities person does not have to go for more money, and the cost of electricity is drastically reduced. So that is an example of changing the business model. And there's a lot of that stuff going on. So you have to be savvy enough when you create a product as to what the real business model is. Now, on the product side here, I talked about majority of startups are built on products, and that is true. And majority of them, of those companies fail. You know, we have some statistics even in the Valley where anywhere from 1 to 2 out of 10 succeed, meaning 8 to 9 out of 10 fail. And it's no wonder, therefore, in Silicon Valley, we invest anywhere from 10 to 12 billion dollars every year, simply because of these statistics. Plus, the cost of technology development is very high, and in many cases, we resort to other countries' engineers to lower the cost a little bit. And so, because of the number of failures, it's a lot of money. On the service side, you can consider a service as a product also. And so some quick comments here. Usually you can build a company that is relatively small in size, and maybe this kind of idea belongs to the small enterprise. It's a service. Like if you have enough talent in programming and you can do this yourself, that's a service. You create an app for somebody, for example. You don't need to build a company, you just know how to code properly, and you have a product. But the product is practiced as a service. You build something for them. Okay, next slide. Now, execution plan. We are on the third success factor now, I think, where the business model is dependent on product idea, IP, product, or service. In many cases, some companies create an intellectual property to license to other companies who may need or have use for that IP, and that is their product. In other words, a patent is a product, and in many cases they are also very valuable. So that can be a business model. And then, of course, I mentioned about product, that's more clear, and service. At the highest level, execution plan is defined by the business model. It is so hard to come up with a plan unless you figure out what your model is. Is it a real product? Is it a service or whatever else? So that has to precede your execution plan. And then in terms of planning, execution plan is a well thought out and documented series of actions with timelines and deliverables to accomplish company objectives. And there are typically two categories: a strategic planning and a tactical plan. A strategic deals with creating a technology roadmap and the product roadmap, usually 3 to 5 years out, but reviewed every year. The execution plan is it's really a financial plan. You have to figure out what you're going to spend that year for all the different departments, whatever they may be doing for the following year. But that has to be so detailed, and usually what we do is we define only 4 corporate objectives for the following year. But we come up with hundreds and hundreds of key results that must be accomplished. And then, since this is for the following year, we put dates on those items to make sure that we can schedule even a product development or sales revenue and so on. So this is a fairly rigid process, and between the strategic planning and creating an execution plan, an operating plan, it takes us 6 months to accomplish. So this is a very important, you have to have a credible execution plan. Next. Now, on the execution plan, sequence is important. Again, as I said, do the strategic planning first, and then the operating plan. And then, of course, in the long-range plan, as I said, the deliverables, product and technology roadmaps. Next slide. Now, this is too much detail for now, but I guess the key point here is that finally, when you have that plan, if you look at the bottom, it is essentially translating those compelling needs into a product defined with some execution plan, and from there you can begin to really, I would say, more than 50% on your way to creating a product. And so it's a long process. As I said, the planning itself is 6 months. Identifying markets, that could take another 6 months. And in the Valley, because semiconductor chips are fairly difficult, or I would say very difficult to design, by the time we have a product, it would take us about 3 years, including this process. And by that time, we have spent easily between $80 to $100 million just for the first product. But if done properly and applied to the market, you can really generate a lot of revenues right away. Like in my second company, within 5 quarters, we had revenues of 70 million right away on the first product. And by the 4th year, we generated revenues of about $650 million. So you can see that if you hit the market right, you created a compelling product, it can be done. And many companies all over the world, I'm sure, have done the same thing. Next. Next, please. Okay, on the strong team, this is probably one of the hardest things to do because you have to search out those engineers and managers who you consider are the best. Now, from an investment point of view, our test as a venture capitalist or as an investor, our test to ourselves is we ask ourselves the question, is this the best team in the world that I can apply to solve this problem? In other words, there are no compromises on this one because of the high cost and then market movement. If you get delayed in your development, markets move. And so what you don't want to do is finally get the product out and instantly your product is old. Again, it's like throwing away money. So timing is crucial. And so the strong team, especially the engineering organization, is where it's so critical. And then, of course, if you, let's see, what is important here is that the product vision usually comes from technical founders. And there are many examples. If you look at Zuckerberg, he has that vision for a social software. No one has done that before. The guys at Google, well, they did their PhD and they figured out some search algorithms that even today no one can match. And that's why they're a large company. Next slide. This is a little bit more detailed, but when you begin, you usually parcel out the management team. In other words, you don't need a salesperson or sales manager right away when you are still trying to design your product. That will take later on. So the message here is that you have to time it properly so that you don't overly spend money right away. So as I said, not necessary to have a complete management team early. You need to do a timely hiring on this one. Now the rest there is just more company building comments. Generally, I like to promote from within first, but if I cannot find from inside the company, then I go outside. But it is important that you don't lose those managers or engineers who already have the experience. And so we're careful enough that we nurture them. And in my practice as a VC, I get very involved with my investments, and I actually nurture the CEO of the company. Typically, in the beginning, I meet with the CEO once a week, and then I lengthen that to once a month after I conclude that the execution is on a rhythm and that they're proceeding to get the product done. Next slide. Okay, the board of directors, this is usually not considered by startups right away. But I'll give you a few points here, and if I can read. At the end of the day, the board of directors make the highest level decisions of the company. It's really not the founders or others. It is the board of directors who will make the decision. And so it is important that the management, especially the entrepreneurs or the founders, they are in sync with the board. And you've probably read examples where the founders, who are very strong-willed people, are crosswise with the board. Usually they get fired, or a CEO gets fired, because ultimately the board of directors decide the fate of the company. Active board members work with management team, therefore, between board meetings. What I usually do in my investment is that I pick the people that I know are capable board members, and I ask them to help the team. They are not there just to meet once a month or whatever and discuss things. I ask them to embed themselves into the company because they have a lot of experience, and it would be a shame if you don't take advantage of that. I myself get immersed in my companies. And then, of course, there's the conflict issue, meaning board members may be in many companies, and you have to watch out for conflict because they may be in one company that is close enough to your product. You just have to ask them and see if there's a conflict there. And then there's usually the I would say, independent board members. It is important that there are members of the board that come from the outside who are very independent thinking, because sometimes there is a little bit of a collusion in decision making, and then because they are the ones who will decide the fate of the company, you don't want them to all go in one direction only to find out that that's the wrong direction. So that's why we hire, not hire, but we ask for people who are independent in thinking to be on the board. Next slide. Okay, the strong financial support. Needless to say, all this means is that you must have enough cash to spend as you build the company. And that could be cash over 4 years or 5 years, because it takes time to create a product. For a simple product, it's much less. So the sooner you start selling and be profitable, the better off you are. But this is a killer in many cases, because if the design is delayed, you need more money, sales, it could be hard to sell because you have a lot of competition. This is also a major killer where the investors, as we call it, they are tired, meaning they don't want to invest any more money in that one company. Because in the way we do it is that a typical VC, like me, typically we have at least about 10 to 15 companies in our portfolio, and we usually budget anywhere from $20 to $30 million per company. But we have other co-investors. And so this is a huge issue to solve in many cases, the financial support. Now, for a startup, assuming you have those 3 or 4 important attributes, and that there are potential investors that are interested, this becomes a minor issue for the entrepreneur, because the VCs usually will tell you, we will take over from here, we will bring our syndicate, and we will fund you. So spend time in creating the product, because this takes a while, especially when you need large amounts. So this is really the 5th success factor. I don't know that there's something else there. Can you flip the slide if there is? Financial support, a 2-step process. In raising any round of money, there's basically 2 simple processes. Convincing the investors to invest, and when you have done that, then you go to the next process of negotiating terms with the investors. They give you the value of your company, and if you don't like it, you argue that. So it's a normal process of negotiation, basically. But you need to attain the first bullet.
you have to convince them enough that they will say, okay, I will invest. And really, that's the gist of that whole thing. Forward. Go ahead. Next. Okay, so this is just a summary again. What I did is a very fast-paced summary on the 5 success factors as I've learned them in Silicon Valley. Thank you.